Hello, I am Mike.
Hello, I am Lily. Welcome to English Podcast Flow.
Today we're diving into something that I think is really crucial for anyone who wants to master English. It's how to train your brain to think in English. It's one thing to memorize vocabulary and grammar rules, but it's a whole other level to make English the language your mind operates in, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
When you can think in English, you just unlock this whole other level of fluency and natural expression that you can't get if you're constantly translating in your head.
Right. And I bet a lot of our listeners out there have experienced that feeling of knowing what they want to say,
Yeah.
but they can't get the words out fast enough because they're busy translating from their native language. It
Yeah.
really slows you down and makes conversations feel a little clunky.
Yeah, for sure. And it's not just about speed either. When you think in English, you start to internalize the nuances of the language, the idioms, the little subtle shades of meaning, the humor things that are often lost in translation.
Yeah, that's so true. So how do we actually get there? What's the secret? What can we do to rewire our brains?
Well, there's no magic button, unfortunately. It takes time, effort, and consistent practice. But the good news is that there are proven techniques that can help you make this shift from translating to thinking in English directly. And we've got 10 of them to share today.
10 steps to English fluency nirvana. I love it. Okay, let's kick things off with step number 1. What's the foundation? What do we need to start with?
So the first and probably most important step is to break the translation habit. We need to start thinking in English directly instead of using our native language as a crutch.
Okay. I mean, that's easier said than done, right? For a lot of us, our native language is like our mental operating system. It's how we process the world. How do we even begin to switch that off?
Well, it starts with small, conscious efforts. Instead of translating every word that you encounter, try to directly associate the English word with the object or concept.
So, like, if I see a cat, I shouldn't think gato and then translate it to cat in my head. I should just immediately think cat.
Exactly. Make
Yeah.
that direct connection in your mind. It might feel a bit unnatural at first, but the more you do it, the more automatic it'll become. Your brain is going to start forming these new pathways, and it's going to bypass the need for translation.
So it's like you're creating these shortcuts in your brain, right? So instead of taking the long, winding road through Translation Alley, you're building a mental expressway to English fluency.
Exactly. And that actually leads perfectly into step number 2, which builds upon this idea of direct association. Start with simple words that you encounter every day. Look around your house, your office, and name the objects in English chair, table, window, book, whatever you see. Practice thinking the English word for it.
Yeah, I like that. It's about making English part of your daily life, not just something you study from a textbook. It's like immersion, but you're doing it in your own mind.
Right. And it's not just about objects either. You can do the same with actions. Instead of thinking, I am going to eat in your native language, think, I am going to eat in English.
So you're basically narrating your life in English, even if it's just internally. I can imagine that might feel a little weird at first, like you're talking to yourself in a different language.
It may feel a little strange, but that's a good sign. It means you're stepping outside your comfort zone and you're actively rewiring your brain. And the more you do it, the easier it will become.
Okay, so we're labeling things in English, we're narrating our actions. What's the next step in this mental makeover?
So step number 3 is to move beyond single words and start creating simple sentences in your mind. Think about your surroundings and describe them in English. The sky is blue, the grass is green, the sun is shining.
I see. So you're taking those individual English words that we've been practicing and kind of putting them together like building blocks to create something more complex.
Exactly. And you can gradually increase the complexity of your sentences as you progress. The birds are singing in the trees. The traffic is loud today. I'm feeling happy because the weather is nice.
I like that. It's not just labeling things anymore. You're expressing thoughts and feelings in English. You're really starting to use the language to engage with the world around you.
Right. The more you use English to interact with your reality, the more natural it will feel to think in the language.
This is where things start to get really interesting for me because it's not just rote memorization anymore. It's about using English as a tool to process and understand our experiences.
Yeah,
It's about making the language a part of who we are.
exactly. And that's what makes thinking in English such a powerful skill. It goes beyond just learning the language. It's about expanding your mental horizons and opening yourself up to new ways of seeing the world.
Okay, I'm hooked. I'm ready for the next step. What's next on our journey to English fluency?
All right, so step number 4 is to embrace the power of self-talk. I know this might sound a little crazy, but just trust me on this one.
Talking to yourself in English. Like full-on conversations with yourself. I have to admit, I've caught myself doing this a few times, usually when I'm trying to work through a problem or make a decision.
Yeah, it's more common than you think. And it's actually a fantastic way to practice thinking in English. When you talk to yourself, you're not worried about making mistakes or sounding awkward. You can experiment with different vocabulary and grammar structures, and you can just really let your thoughts flow.
So it's like having a built-in conversation partner who's always available and never judges you. I can definitely see the appeal of that.
Exactly. And it doesn't have to be these full-blown conversations. You can simply just narrate your actions as you go about your day. Like, I'm brushing my teeth, I'm making breakfast, I'm getting ready for work. Simple things, but it keeps your mind engaged with the language.
It's like you're giving your brain a constant workout in English.
Right.
You're constantly flexing those language muscles, making those connections stronger.
You got it. And the beauty of it is you can do it anytime, anywhere. While you're cooking, showering, commuting, even just relaxing on the couch. Just make it a habit.
Okay, so I'm ready to embrace my inner English-speaking voice.
Mhm.
What's the next level up for this self-talk technique?
So step number 5 takes self-talk a step further and encourages you to think in English before you go to sleep. As you're lying in bed, try to mentally review your day in English. Think about the things that you did, the people that you met, the conversations you had, all in English.
Interesting. So it's like journaling, but in your mind and in a different language. I've heard that reviewing things before bed helps with memory. Does that apply to language learning as well?
Absolutely. When you review information before you go to sleep, your brain has a chance to process it and store it more effectively. So by thinking about your day in English, you're not only practicing the language, you're actually helping your brain to solidify those new neural pathways.
It's like giving your brain a bedtime story in English. I
Yeah.
love that.
And, it doesn't have to be this perfect recounting of your day. Just let your thoughts wander and try to express them in English, even if it's just fragments or keywords. The important thing is just to keep your mind engaged with the language.
I'm starting to see a pattern here. It seems like a lot of these techniques are about finding ways to integrate English into our daily routines and our thought processes,
Yeah.
rather than treating it as this separate subject that we have to study.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's about making English an integral part of your life so it becomes as natural as breathing. And speaking of making things natural, our next step focuses on asking yourself questions in English.
Ooh, I'm intrigued. What kind of questions are we talking about here?
Simple, everyday questions that you might ask yourself throughout the day. What should I have for breakfast? Or what am I going to wear today? Or what do I need to get done today?
And the key is to ask and answer these questions internally in English, right?
Exactly. It might feel a bit awkward at first, but it forces you to think quickly and to recall vocabulary on the spot. And it also helps you get used to formulating thoughts and expressing yourself in English.
Yeah, it's like you're giving your brain a little pop quiz throughout the day.
Exactly. And the more you do it, the quicker your responses will become and the more comfortable you'll feel thinking in English. It's all about building that mental agility and fluency.
Okay, I'm ready to start interrogating myself in English, so what's next?
So step number 7 is all about giving your ears a good workout by listening to English as much as possible.
I knew this one was coming. This is like classic advice for language learners, but it's so important.
It really is. Listening to English immerses you in the sounds and the rhythms of the language. It helps you pick up new vocabulary and phrases, and it trains your ear to understand different accents and speaking styles.
And nowadays, there are just so many different ways to do this right. We've got podcasts and audiobooks and movies and TV shows, just surrounded by English content.
Exactly. And don't worry if you don't understand every single word at first. Just focus on getting the gist of what's being said and enjoy the process.
Yeah, it's about getting your brain used to the music of the language, even if you can't quite decipher all the notes yet.
Well, I think it's time for us to take a little break. We've covered a lot of ground already, and I bet our listeners' brains are buzzing with all these new ideas.
I agree. We'll be right back with part 2 of our podcast, where we'll reveal the final 3 steps to thinking in English like a pro. So stay tuned.
See you soon. Welcome back to English Podcast Flow. We're right in the middle of our 10-step plan to help you rewire your brain to think in English.
We are. And we left off talking about immersing yourself in the sounds of English by listening to all sorts of things. But listening is only one half of the equation. What's the other key ingredient to unlock fluency?
Well, you can't really have a good conversation without someone to talk to.
Right.
And when it comes to learning English, that someone can be the written word.
Oh, reading. Makes sense. Such a classic piece of language learning advice.
Hmm.
But I'm curious, how does just reading text translate into actually thinking in English?
Well, reading exposes you to so much vocabulary and grammar structures and idiomatic expressions that you might not encounter in regular conversations. It's like this treasure trove of language just waiting to be discovered.
Okay, so it expands your knowledge base, but how does it actually change the way you think?
When you read in English, you really want to focus on understanding the meaning of the text as a whole without getting bogged down in translating every single word.
Ah, so you're training your brain to process information directly in English rather than taking that detour through translation.
Right. And the more you read, your brain is going to start to recognize patterns and make connections between words and phrases. You'll start to internalize the logic and flow of the English language, and that will gradually seep into your own thinking.
I can see that. It's like
Yeah.
absorbing the language through osmosis. But let's be real, reading in a foreign language can be tough, especially when you're first starting out. Any tips for making it more enjoyable and more effective?
Oh, for sure. First of all, choose material that you're actually interested in. Don't force yourself to read something boring just because you think it's good for you.
So if I'm a big fan of mystery novels, I should go for like an Agatha Christie book in English
Yeah.
rather than slogging through some, dry textbook.
Exactly. The more you enjoy it, the more likely you are to stick with it. And don't be afraid to start with something simple like graded readers or children's books. The key is to build your confidence and fluency gradually.
Yeah, there's no shame in starting small.
Yeah.
So what are some other strategies to make reading in English feel less like a chore and more like something you actually want to do?
Well, another helpful tip is to read out loud even if it's just to yourself. This kind of helps you engage more senses, and it helps connect the written word with the spoken word.
Oh, so it's like adding another layer of immersion. You're not just reading the words, you're hearing them and feeling them in your mouth.
Exactly. And again, don't worry about sounding perfect. The goal here isn't to give a flawless performance, it's just to get comfortable with the sounds and rhythms of the language.
That's good to hear. I've always felt a bit self-conscious about reading aloud in English, but I can see how it could be a good tool.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And as you get more comfortable reading aloud, you can even try recording yourself and listening back to it. This can help you identify any areas where you might need to improve your pronunciation or your intonation.
That's a great idea. Okay, so we've talked about listening and reading as key ingredients for thinking in English. What's the final piece of the puzzle? How do we create a truly immersive English-speaking environment, even if we don't live in an English-speaking country?
This is where things get really exciting. Step number 9 is all about surrounding yourself with English as much as possible.
Okay, this sounds like a challenge, but a fun one. So how do we do that? Short of packing my bags and moving to London.
Well, you don't have to go to those extremes. There are tons of simple things that you can do to bring more English into your life.
Like what? Give me some ideas.
We'll start by changing the language settings on your phone and your computer to English. It might seem like a small change, but it'll expose you to English vocabulary and grammar every time you use your devices.
Oh, I never thought of that. It's like a little reminder to think in English throughout the day.
Exactly. You can also watch movies and TV shows in English, listen to English music, and even follow English-speaking social media accounts.
So you're making English a part of your leisure time, not just something you study.
Right. The goal is to create a fun and engaging environment where you're just naturally surrounded by English without even realizing it.
Yeah, it's like sneaking English into your life through the back door. I like it.
Exactly. And don't forget about real-life interactions, too. If you have the opportunity to try to speak English with friends, colleagues, or language partners, even if it's just for a few minutes each day.
Right, so finding ways to actually practice speaking in real situations, not just in a classroom or with a textbook.
Right. The more you use English actively, the more confident and fluent you'll become. And as you start to think more in English speaking, will also become easier and more natural.
Yeah, it's like this virtuous cycle, right?
Mhm.
The more you think in English, the easier it is to speak. And the more you speak, the more confident you become in your thinking.
Exactly. It all works together. And speaking of working together, our final step kind of brings all these techniques together and gives you a framework for consistent progress.
All ears. Lay it on me.
All right, so the 10th and final step is to create a personalized language learning routine that incorporates all of these techniques in a way that works for you.
So it's about finding the right balance of listening, reading, speaking, and thinking in English that fits your lifestyle and your learning preferences.
Yeah, exactly. There's no one-size-fits-all approach. Some people might thrive on very structured study sessions with textbooks and grammar exercises, while others might prefer a more immersive approach with lots of listening and real-life interaction.
Right? The key is to experiment and find what works best for you. It's about creating a language learning journey that you actually enjoy and that you can sustain so you can stay motivated and make progress over time.
Absolutely. And remember, consistency is key. Even if you can only dedicate like 15 or 20 minutes each day to practicing these techniques, it can make a huge difference in the long run.
It's like any other skill, right? Whether it's playing a musical instrument or learning a sport, consistent practice is what makes all the difference.
Exactly. And just like an athlete trains their body to perform at its best, we can train our brains to think in English fluently and effortlessly.
Wow, we've covered a lot of ground today. I feel like we've only scratched the surface. There's so much more to explore when it comes to thinking in English.
I agree. We've given you the tools now. It's up to you to go out and use them. Experiment, have fun, and don't be afraid to make mistakes. Remember, the journey to fluency is a marathon, not a sprint.
Very well said.
We've talked about a lot, haven't we? We've explored 10 techniques to help you make English the language that your mind uses. Everything from breaking that translation habit to immersing yourself in the language.
And now it's time to answer some of your burning questions about this. So let's dive right in.
Let's do it.
Okay, our first question comes from Sarah in Canada. Sarah writes, I've been trying to think in English, but I keep hitting a wall. I feel like I'm constantly translating in my head. Any advice?
That's a great question, Sarah. And a lot of language learners struggle with this. It's really important to remember that thinking in a new language is a skill. It takes time and it takes practice. It's not going to happen overnight.
Right? It's like learning to play an instrument. You can't expect to pick up a guitar for the first time and play like Jimi Hendrix. It takes time and effort to develop those skills, to build those neural pathways and make the movements feel natural.
Exactly. So don't get discouraged if you find yourself kind of slipping back into that translation mode. It's totally normal. The key is to be aware of when you're doing it and gently redirect your mind back to thinking in English.
So it's about catching yourself and making that conscious choice to think in English. But are there any strategies we can use to make this process a little easier?
Oh, yeah, for sure. One technique that I found really helpful is to visualize the object or the concept that you're trying to think of. So, if you're trying to remember the word apple, for example, just picture a nice bright red apple in your mind. This can help strengthen that connection between the image and the English word, and you can bypass the need for translation.
It's like creating a mental picture dictionary.
Exactly. And you can use this technique for verbs and adjectives too. If you're trying to think of the verb to run, picture yourself running through a park. Or if you're trying to remember the adjective happy, just picture someone smiling or laughing.
I love that.
Okay.
Let's move on to our next question. This one comes from Marco in Italy. Marco asks, what's the best way to find English-speaking friends or language partners online?
That's a great question, Marco. And the good news is that it's easier than ever to connect with people from all over the world. These days, there are so many different platforms and communities online for language exchange and cultural exchange. You can find people who share your interests and your goals, and even people in your time zone.
So it's all about finding your tribe, even if they're scattered around the world. What are some good places to start looking?
Well, there are apps and websites like HelloTalk and Tandem where you can connect with people who are learning English or who are native English speakers who want to learn your language. And these platforms have cool features built in like text and voice chat so you can practice your speaking and writing skills in real time.
That sounds awesome.
Yeah.
Are there any other options if you want something less structured?
Yeah, definitely. Social media platforms like Facebook and Reddit have tons of groups and forums for language learning. You can join those groups and introduce yourself and start connecting with other learners. And you can, share tips, ask questions, and even arrange to meet up online to study together.
It's all about finding that supportive community.
That's right. It's nice to know that you're not alone. And speaking of not being alone, let's move on to our final question. This one's from Maria in Spain, and it's probably on a lot of people's minds. Maria asks, how long does it realistically take to start thinking in English?
That is the million-dollar question. I bet a lot of our listeners want to know this one. So tell us, what's the secret?
Well, Maria, there's no easy answer to that one. Everyone learns at their own pace, and it really depends on a lot of different things. Things like your language background, how much time you can dedicate to practicing, how immersive your environment is, and even your natural aptitude for language.
So it's a combination of nature and nurture, effort and exposure.
Yeah.
But even though there's no set timeline, are there any signs that you're heading in the right direction?
Oh, for sure. One of the best signs is when you start catching yourself thinking in English without even realizing it, Like maybe you're walking down the street and you see a beautiful bird and the word bird just pops into your head in English. You don't even have to translate it.
Or you're thinking about your next vacation and you're picturing the beach. and all the words that are coming to mind are already in English.
Exactly. Those are the moments when you know you're making progress, when English becomes less of a foreign language and more of a natural way of thinking.
I feel like a mental switch is flipped and English is just a part of you now.
And the more you immerse yourself in English and challenge yourself to think in it, those moments will become more frequent. You might start dreaming in English, having conversations with yourself in your head, and even thinking in English when you're not actively using the language.
Yeah, it's like English is becoming a part of your mind.
That's the goal, to make English feel as natural as your native language.
And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this episode of English Podcast Flow.
We've covered so much today, but keep the conversation going. Keep practicing, and most importantly, don't give up on your dreams of speaking English fluently.
Thanks for joining us on this journey.
Happy learning!
If you enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe. It really helps our channel grow and reach more English learners like you. By subscribing, you'll never miss a new episode, and by liking the video, you're letting us know you want more helpful content. Thank you for your support. It means so much to us.